morning. Welcome to the Green Dialogue. This Green Dialogue started 3 years ago on Earth Day. And so we're getting near our 3-year anniversary every Wednesday, which is amazing. But each week is a little bit different. And today it's more of a blue dialogue because we're talking about water. And thank you, Ruth, for joining us. Ruth Kline-Robach is in the Department of Community Sustainability at MSU. And she also does other things, which I hope you'll tell us about, Ruth. And I'm just going to stop talking. Does anybody have any quick comments before we get started? Okay, we'll hand it over to you, Ruth. Thank you for being here.
For sure. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I am an outreach specialist at Michigan State University, and I'm in the Department of Community Sustainability and the Institute of Water Research. I started my career working solely on groundwater issues and working with, at the time, they were DEQ. For those of you who have been around a while, they went from DEQ to DNRE, back to DEQ, and now we're EGLE, Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. And I've been working with them pretty much my whole career on source water protection programs. And then I also do a fair amount of work with stormwater management, which I understand you've had some discussions around that, and then watershed planning and management. And today, what I thought we would do is talk about drinking water, and specifically looking at things that we can do to protect our drinking water sources. And I'm going to focus today on both individual sources of water and community water supplies. And I thought I would start just to kind of get a sense of who we have here on the call. Just ask you this question: what is the source of your drinking water supply? And if you could just go into the chat box, type in, where does your water come from? And by that, I mean, don't say the faucet, because I do have students that usually say that. Where does it come from before it gets to the faucet? Who's providing your water? How is the water getting to your house? Okay, I see one answer, the Saginaw Aquifer. That's very, very good. I live in a park with a well, East Lansing Meridian Water Authority. And if you don't know, that's okay. East Lansing Meridian, groundwater, Meridian Township. Okay. Sounds like we've got a good crowd here. So I'm glad that we do have private wells represented, because I want to talk a little bit about both of those. But I think the important message here is that we are all using groundwater in this part of Michigan, in the mid-Michigan area. Everybody is using groundwater for our drinking water supply. So I hope many of you have seen a groundwater flow model in action. This is just a physical model that shows us how water moves beneath the surface, especially in a place like Michigan with a lot of glaciation, a lot of unconsolidated material. So what we're looking at here is a series of aquifers. The top layer is an unconfined aquifer, and then at some point beneath the surface, we hit a clay layer or a shale layer, a layer of relatively impermeable soil. And then beneath that, then we have usually multiple confined aquifers. And then at depth, in some parts of Michigan, right at the surface, we have bedrock. And the difference really between the bedrock aquifers and the unconsolidated drift aquifers is that in this latter, the unconsolidated formations, the water is held in the pore spaces of the soil particles. And then in the bedrock, the water is held in the cracks and fissures of the bedrock. Although in the Saginaw Formation, for those of you who are familiar with our highly productive aquifer here in mid-Michigan, we have some primary porosity, which is water that's held in the pore spaces, and then water in the cracks and fissures of the bedrock. So groundwater is extremely important in Michigan. About half the population of the world is using groundwater for drinking water. And in Michigan, we usually use about 44% is what we say are people that are drinking groundwater. But I think the important part is that in the rural areas, our rural communities, we are at about 90% groundwater usage. And we have more than 1 million private drinking water wells across the state. Now, our public supplies are interesting. This map that you see here on the right is all of our, what we would term community groundwater supplies or public water supplies. And for Michigan, almost everybody that is along the coastal areas is using Great Lakes water or connecting waters. And all of the other blue boxes that you see there are community groundwater supplies, most of which are groundwater. Michigan is unique in the fact that we really literally only have about a handful of drinking water supplies that are using surface water in the inland areas of Michigan. And the reason for that is because we have such prolific groundwater resources. So when we're talking about using groundwater, we're using wells. We drill a well, we put a pump in there, and we pump the water up. So the wells on the left are residential wells. This one is an older steel well, 2-inch casing, and this is a more common PVC 5-inch well that most residents are probably more familiar with. And then the well on the right is one of our municipal wells. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm not going to talk for a long time. I'm just going to give you kind of the background basics of what I think are the big issues in terms of public and private groundwater supply systems, and then we can open it up for discussion. So the first question I usually ask, or the first suggestion when I do training sessions is I tell people to know where your water's coming from. A lot of times if we turn the faucet on, the water looks good, it doesn't smell too bad, it seems fine. We tend not to ask the question, where is this coming from? So number one, is your water coming from a public water supply system or a private drinking water well? And if you're on a public water supply, you you're going to get a water bill. You're going to have some correspondence with that water supply. Well, by law, under the Safe Drinking Water Act, public water supplies are required to produce an annual water quality report. In the legislation, it's referred to as a consumer confidence report. So you can see the East Lansing Meridian CCR or water quality report on the left. Those reports are available online. So you can log on and find this water quality report. It will summarize the sampling that was conducted for the water supply over the past year, tell you the source of the water and some other good information about your water supply. Now, for those of you who are on wells, who are using private wells for your drinking water, Michigan has a database of water well and pump records. This was required by about the mid-1960s. Every time a well is drilled, the well driller is required to fill out the water well and pump record. And this tells us how deep the well is, the type of well, what the well is being used for, a lot of good information. So I would encourage you to just Google Eagle Well Logic Database and see if you can locate your water well and pump record for your private drinking water supply. So let's hop into talking about things we can do to protect groundwater. And I'm going to start with wells. So first of all, if you have a private water well, we want to make sure that it is maintained. I have a couple of pictures of wells that are not being well maintained. So we want to make sure that the casing's intact, that we have a nice seal on the well cap. These are examples of what we would not want to see. We want to make sure that we've got drainage away from our well, that we're protecting our wellhead. I just walked by someone in my neighborhood who did not have barriers around their well, and they had a service truck back up into their yard and crushed their well casing. So being cognizant of the well and how it can be protected. Now, oftentimes, if you have a private well, not always, but usually if you're on a private well, you're often on a private on-site wastewater system, a septic system. And so we spend a lot of time talking about septic system maintenance for communities or for residents that have these systems. And probably the two biggest messages is that the tank has to be pumped regularly. A lot of people don't understand that. There's a lot of bacteria, there's a lot of digestion going on. It's taking care of a good amount of the solids in the tank, but anything other than pee or poop or toilet paper is just going to hang out in that tank. And unless it's vacuumed out on a regular basis, there's nowhere for it to go, and it is jeopardizing the function of the drain field or the absorption field. And we probably, I wouldn't hear anyone in the water supply sector argue with this. We really want to get the message across that flushable wipes should not be flushed. And they say flushable on the packaging. They wreak havoc on a septic system, and they wreak havoc on a municipal water resource recovery facility as well. So maintaining the septic system, regularly pumping it, and being careful about what is being flushed. Using care and caution with any kind of hazardous materials, any lawn care products, making sure unused wells are being properly plugged. If a well is on property and you haven't used it for a while, you should call a certified well driller to properly close the abandoned wells. So care and caution with the way that we're using any kind of materials. For private well owners, this is the other thing that people tend to be surprised about. In most cases, nobody's checking the quality of the water once that well is put in place. Now, we have some counties that have a point of sale or a time of sale or transfer program, which means that when a property changes hands, when your house is sold, it requires a well and septic inspection. But that's only maybe a dozen, less than a dozen counties that have that. So if you are a private well owner, it is up to you to take the initiative to test your water. And it's fairly easy to do. It sounds daunting, but it's not. You can start with your county health department, contacting the environmental health division of your local or district health department, or we have the state drinking water laboratory right here in Lansing. You can call the lab directly and have the sample bottles shipped to you for a test. And we can talk more about that if you're interested. Now let's move to municipal water supplies, which it sounds like the majority of our participants are using East Lansing Meridian Water Supply. And I know that Joel Martinez met with this group. I talked to Joel the other day and he said that he had talked to you. So I know that you're familiar with the East Lansing Meridian Water Supply System. And we encourage, we meaning collectively people who do water stuff, I guess, of source water protection for municipal water supplies. So East Lansing Meridian does have a wellhead protection program in place, and that is it's due for an update. So Joel is thinking about that and strategizing how that program is going to be updated. And Michigan State University has an updated wellhead protection program in place, as do many of our other surrounding communities. The city of Lansing, Lauren and I sit on that committee for their wellhead protection program. I chair the wellhead protection program for Michigan State. So what does that mean? What is it that we're trying to do? Well, the idea with source water protection is that we are looking at the land area that is supplying water to those municipal wells. Remember that big honking well that I showed you at the beginning? Those municipal wells, we delineate the wellhead protection area, which shows us the land area that is supplying water to that well. And many communities use a 10-year time of travel. Some use a longer time of travel, like City of Lansing, we have delineated 40 years out. And then, so we know the land area that's supplying the water to our well, we are going to put management strategies in place within that land area to protect the water supply. Surface water supplies, all of those supplies that I talked about earlier along the coast of Michigan, have what we call surface water intake protection programs. So they're looking at what could potentially be impacting the intakes that are going out into the Great Lakes, for example. So let's zero in on the source water programs for municipal supplies that are using groundwater. And I put down here at the bottom, although Michigan has a state wellhead protection program or source water protection program, the program is voluntary at the local level. So we really want to encourage communities, help communities to take that step and commit to this voluntary program of protecting their drinking water supplies. If they do say, yes, we are going to do a source water protection program, that program has to meet these 7 elements. It's basically, we're pulling together a team who can help us protect the water supply. We are delineating the wellhead protection area. What is the land area that's supplying water to the well? We take a look within that delineated area. Where are our potential contaminant sources? It might be chemical storage, it might be land application of manure, it can be a bunch of different potential sources. That's our contaminant source inventory. We come up with management strategies to help to protect that delineated area. We look at what we would do in a water supply emergency. That's called contingency planning. So if something funky happened to our drinking water supply, what would we do in the short term and the long term to provide water to our citizens? We want to be forward thinking about where we might put additional wells moving into the future. So we'd want to think, okay, in 5 years or 10 years, are we going to need additional capacity as a community, and where might those wells be located? And then always, 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 every program that I work on has an education and outreach component. So this is a picture, this is a graphic of a wellhead delineations. And so the triangles that you see here are the municipal supply well locations. And the black outline is our 10-year time of travel delineated area. So this is the area that we would protect in the source water protection program, the wellhead protection program. That radial circle that I put there, I just put that there to emphasize that some communities or some states allow this radial delineation. So they draw a circle around the well and say, that's the area that you need to protect. And the reason so many years ago, back in the early 1990s, that Michigan chose to have delineated wellhead areas is exactly because of what you see here. Because with our highly variable geology, oftentimes the delineated area extends well beyond that circle drawn around the well. So this is what we're trying to protect. And when I say management strategies for these wellhead areas, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Working with planning and zoning. So working with our planning department to make sure that we don't have ultra problematic land uses within that 10-year time of travel. Making sure that when a development project is underway, that it is planned and it's sited properly, that we have all of the proper environmental permits in place. We're doing everything we can to make sure that we're not going to have a negative impact on those public supply wells. And then lastly, I think for both private well owners and municipal water supplies, we want to encourage people to learn everything they can about groundwater, to talk about what we can do to be good stewards of our drinking water, which is why I think meetings like this are so great, because it gives us a chance to talk about what things we can do collectively and individually. I'll draw your attention to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Care for My Drinking Water website. They have a lot of really good information, both regarding public water supplies and private water supplies. So if you are interested in this idea of being a drinking water steward, what can I do? Where can I learn more? This is a great place to start. So now I think that's just kind of background information for you, and we'll open it up to have a shared discussion. We can talk about anything you want.
Wow, that was a deluge of useful information. Thank you so much.
For sure.
I'm going to mute myself, and looks like we might have some questions here. If not, I'll ask a couple.
Yeah.
May I ask a question? The two I have is, let's see, what about water saving strategies, and how do the water systems deal with microplastics, if at all?
Water saving strategies. So that's an interesting question, and that has been a tough nut to crack in mid-Michigan. And the reason I think, and this is all my personal opinion, is that we are in such a water-rich location that having water conservation discussions has typically been a little bit tough for us. I will say that with new technology, new fixtures, we are seeing a lot of water savings in municipal, in urbanized areas. With low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, that's probably where we're seeing the biggest bang for the buck. So irrigation scheduling, things like that can come into play. The low hanging fruit that we tend to fall back on, again, this is my opinion, is, turn the faucet off when you're brushing the teeth, which that's, I don't think anybody can argue with that, but where we're really seeing, I think, significant advances in water savings is with technology, with new fixtures. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
How did the water supplies either deal with microplastics?
Yeah, microplastics. So I am not a municipal water supply person, so I'm probably not the best person to address how the treatment technology. I will say that there was, there's research underway about microplastics that are coming out of wastewater or water resource recovery facilities. So we know that we are seeing microplastics coming into our surface water supplies. I don't know that we necessarily have an answer yet, but again, I'm not really the person to talk about that because I'm not savvy on the treatment technologies. Williamston was involved in a research program with Wayne State. I don't know if you all had heard about that. Microplastics, they were looking at, because a significant amount of the microplastics come from us laundering our fancy clothes. All of the stuff that comes from our clothing, that's a big source of it. So they were looking at, could we put our clothing in special bags? Could we put special filters on our washing machines so that we're capturing some of those microplastics before they hit the wastewater plant? That's an area that I think we're going to be seeing additional research moving into the future.
I have two questions.
Athena? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. One is more remote and the other one is more general. The remote is, you remember the East Palestine toxic issue, and one of the solutions, whether it's temporary or not, was to carry water to a very deep well somewhere close to the area. And buying a house actually the shore, but maybe a couple 100 miles from that, maybe a little less than that. And she was wondering, how safe is the containment in a deep well of water that may have potentially, who knows not what kinds of toxicities in it.
Okay, your audio was cutting out a little bit, so I'm not sure I got all of that, but the East Palestine train derailment is, I think, a really good reminder to us about the fact that we need to be thinking about contingencies and emergency response. And certainly communities have emergency response programs in place. And we use, all of us in this area have a train running through our communities, and not always necessarily within a wellhead protection area, but if you take a look at some of those train cars that are passing on a daily basis, this is something we need to be thinking about. Now, the question that you asked, Athena, I think is to like water storage into deeper aquifers.
Yes, one of the solutions was to carry some of the toxic water to a very deep well.
Oh, gotcha. So underground injection. So underground injection is you could spend a whole dialogue talking about that. That is something that we have done in the US for, I don't know, forever, I guess. And the idea with underground injection is that we shoot the hazardous materials so deep beneath the surface, miles and miles and miles, that the people who do the modeling say there would be no connection between those deeper systems, geologic formations, and what we're using for our drinking water. And that could very well be. I tend to be of a mindset that how can, do we really think that's a good idea? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a very good idea, but that is a program that is in place. It's the underground injection control program. You can read more about that. You can Google about that and learn about those federal regulations. That's something that you could debate.
I really appreciate hearing that. That's something, because I had no idea where to look for that. The second thing is, you hear of people throwing away medications in the water supply. And I'm wondering, how good are we at removing? Can we remove? Are there systems in place to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what we're talking about is, we generally lump them into this category that we call pharmaceuticals and personal care products. And there's been, way back in, I think it was like the early 2000s, the U.S. Geological Survey did a reconnaissance sampling program across the U.S. looking at pharmaceuticals in drinking water supplies. And what they were finding was, yes, they're there. And many of our traditional systems are not designed to remove those types of chemicals from our drinking water. So what that means is that we have, and I want to emphasize, we're finding them in the water at extremely low levels. So let's make that very clear. But I always use the example of my mother. So my mom, before she died, was, she was 87 years old, and I think she took 13 different medications. She had one of those big old pill boxes. And I think that's pretty typical now, right? We have a longer lifespan and we tend to use a lot of pharmaceuticals. So think about that. All of the medications, birth control pills, heart medicines, anything and everything, those residuals are getting flushed either into our municipal supply or into our septic system. Now, there has been research that has been completed that is showing the feminization of fish species, for example. So we know that even at very low levels, those pharmaceuticals are out there. What we don't really have a handle on is what is the collective impact, especially over the long term. So our message is, we do not want to flush pharmaceuticals, period. those have to be landfilled. Now, I think it's much easier to convince people to take their unused medications to take back programs. Used to be kind of hard to find those. We'd have to have special events, but now, like, even I know that Meyer has at their pharmacies, if you have pills that for whatever reason they didn't work for you, you have them sitting around, you can take them back and just put them into their locked drop box and get rid of them. So that is an important message. We do not want to flush medications. Now that raises other interesting questions though, because we lump it into that personal care products thing too. So if we think about antibacterial soaps, all of that potentially is having an impact on our water supply too. If we're using those types of products, we know that we have to be cautious about antibiotic resistance moving into the future. So thinking about the types of products that we use is another way to help to protect our water. Very good question.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Amanda?
Thanks. Yeah, there are a whole bunch of spring collections going on right now too, with Earth Day and the Recycle-Rama, and they all take back the unwanted medicines. So hopefully everyone can take advantage of that. I have a couple of questions. One, embarrassingly, I listened hard. I had a question I couldn't answer at the MSU Science Festival about groundwater, and it was, is the Saginaw Aquifer a confined or an unconfined aquifer?
Well, I would consider it a confined aquifer. It's deep. There are likely confining layers over the top of it. I mean, there may be, I don't know. I haven't looked at the whole, do we have a geologist on the call that has a good picture? Carol Luukkonen would be a perfect person to talk about that if she's able to characterize like what's happening in the upper layers of that aquifer system. It really just, you know, depends. Most of our wells that we're using in the Saginaw Formation are quite deep. So the chances are that we have confining materials over that the aquifer that we're using.
Okay.
There's a lot of variability in our geology, just because of the way that the when the glaciers retreated, that all of those materials were laid down. It's hard to tell where a confining layer begins and ends.
I see.
We do the best we can with the well records that we have in WellLogic. And we've done some pretty remarkable things in terms of mapping, but we really don't have a super clear picture statewide of what our geology looks like.
Interesting. Okay. Two more questions. I know you're supposed to test your well water regularly, but how often is regularly?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And what I tell my students, I would be thrilled if everyone who had a private well did it once, like literally at least once, because so many people have not. We usually say annually. I don't know very many people that test their well annually, but certainly get a baseline. And that's a good question too. Like people tend to want to test for everything. So like test for all the things. And that's not realistic because you could spend, you know, your life savings doing testing. So usually what I say is that to start, test for two things. You get 2 sample bottles. One is drinking water coliforms, and that's going to tell us if we have some kind of bacteriological issue with the water. That test, and I always goof up the two, it's either $16 or $18 at the state laboratory. So drinking water coliforms, and the second one is called a partial chemistry test. And that includes things like fluoride and chloride, and it includes nitrate. And the reason that we are concerned about nitrate is that we have a maximum contaminant level as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act standards of nitrate of 10 milligrams per liter. So those are health-based standards. We have about 100 contaminants that are on our drinking water standards list that our community water supplies test for. And nitrate can cause significant health concerns for infants and pregnant women specifically, because it leads to a condition called methemoglobinemia, which is called blue baby syndrome, because it takes the oxygen out of the blood. So we test for drinking water coliforms and a partial chemistry test. They're $16 and $18, something like that. If we are in an area where we know we have elevated arsenic, there are a number of counties. I live in Shiawassee County, and we have seen elevated arsenic in Shiawassee County. I would also get another sample bottle and test for arsenic, and that's another $18 or so. Now, if those initial results come back and you see elevated nitrate, then you might say, maybe depending on the land use, let's say you're adjacent to a cornfield, then you might do some additional testing for pesticides. If you are in an area where we know we have seen impact from PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which I'm sure you have all seen in the news, then we might want to do additional testing for that. But for most private well owners, if we could get them to test for partial chemistry and drinking water coliforms once every year would be great. But even if you could do it every 3 years or every 5 years, just to make sure that things are okay. I will say we did a survey, I want to say maybe like 10 or 15 years back, and we surveyed private well owners. We were trying to figure out why people didn't test their well water. And of course, a lot of the answers were like, I don't know, I never thought about it, I don't know how to do it. But you know what the number one answer was, I'm X years old, I've been drinking this water for 20 years, leave me alone, I'm fine. I'm fine and everything's fine. So that's, we hear that a lot. So testing your private water supply is really important. It's up to you as the homeowner to do it. Sarah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have two questions. So when you're talking about testing the well, and what happens if it comes back and it's not okay, and you've just spent $5,000 to dig a well, whatever, and it comes back? What does that mean? Does that mean you have to dig a different well, or can you, is there treatment?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yep, that's a great question. So sometimes, and it depends on what's going on with your well. Sometimes if it's a bacteria problem, your well can be shock chlorinated. So you're literally bleaching your well. I'll usually recommend that you contact a well driller to do anything like that. So you can shock chlorinate it, test it again. It can get a little bit frustrating if something comes back and you're not sure why. It turns into a little bit of a detective thing, because it might be the household plumbing that's creating the problem. Sometimes we can do filters. We can do point of use. You can put it right on your faucet. There are charcoal filters. There are reverse osmosis systems. Some people have whole house filters. The challenge that I have seen throughout my career with filters is that people tend to put them on, think that things are cool, and then they never change the filter. So they end up with bacteria coming from this really cruddy filter that isn't being maintained. Especially people who have the refrigerators with the ice maker and the water on the door. I was at someone's house. I shouldn't share this, but I said, is your water okay in this fridge? And they said, oh yeah, it's great. I said, when's the last time you changed this filter? And they said, filter? Like, no, thanks. Can I have a beer? Something like that. You just have to be cautious about changing the filter. So there are different treatment options. Now, sometimes it depends on what the contaminant is. Sometimes it might be that your only option is to drill a deeper well. I mean, it just depends on what's happening. Usually it doesn't, I wouldn't say usually, but oftentimes it doesn't get to that point where you would have to do that, but we have seen it happen. Absolutely. So it just depends on what the contaminant is, what's happening in your system.
Okay, thank you. So I have one other question. So in terms of when wells, like say you buy a piece of property and you go to the county and you do the well logic and it shows where wells, like a well has been. And even the county comes out and can't find it.
Mm.
What do you, I mean,
So are you thinking about an abandoned well, a well that's no longer in use?
yeah, like, and the county comes out and they probe and they can't find the septic tank and they can't find the old well and like,
Yeah.
what do you do with that?
Sometimes it's challenging and it's not always possible. Now, one of the problems that we have with the well logic database. So remember I said we started submitting these water well and pump records back in the mid 1960s. In those days, and I see some people on here that I am guessing you remember the days before we had GPS in our hand. So what the well drillers used to do is they would literally take a plat map when they went out to drill a well, and they would take a quarter section and they would take their pen and they'd mark an X where they were drilling the well. So then what we would do, and I can remember doing this as a graduate student, we would digitize those well locations. So we'd take those plat maps and we would draw around them with the mouse and put them on a map. And that's how we got our locations. So what that means is we have a lot of not properly located wells in the well logic database, especially mostly for residential wells. So it's not uncommon that you might not be able to find a well location. If you look in well logic and like, well, this is supposed to be here. Now I grew up on a farm in northern Michigan, and the farm is a dairy farm. That well in well logic is located on well logic in the next section. So it's like way over from the actual location. Same with septic. Sometimes, I use my community or my neighborhood here where I live. When the leach fields or the drain fields were put in, they were all undersized. So they have all been replaced in the last 30 years. And when we have well and septic inspectors come out here, they'll be probing around. They're like, what the heck? There are 2 drain fields in this backyard. What's going on? And that's not documented anywhere. So it's data management is a huge issue. All we can do is the best we can do. And sometimes we can't find things.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Who's next? Do we want to go with Bruce and then John?
Yeah. One of the things that the people in this group are working on now is we're trying to establish natural burial site location in the township. And one of the things we were asked to look for is or to check with Eagle or the Ingham County Health is any effects of that would have on local or water issues. So I guess my question is are you aware of anything that any kind of requirement where we have to be so far away from one of our wellheads or anything of that nature?
And Bruce, did you say burial?
Yes, natural
Burial.
burial. Yep.
I don't know what the requirements are, but I will say there was a study done, and I'm looking at, I don't know if Lauren is still on the call. The city of Lansing worked with USGS on a study of a cemetery and the impacts on groundwater. And that might be, if you're not familiar with that, see if we can get that study. That would help. I mean, probably that would be something we would want to look at the delineated areas for East Lansing Meridian. Probably we would not want to locate it in that 10-year time of travel, just based on, what we know about what happens with, the bodies before they are put into the ground. So I would start with that study, and that may even lead to, that might have some background information on what, if any, requirements there are specifically for impacts on groundwater.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Mhm. And John?
Yeah, well, there's a zillion chemicals out there and a lot of them have never been tested, I think, for whatever, and new ones every day, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm wondering how university researchers, EPA kind of figure out what to study, because you can't study all of them. I'm kind of guessing that the only way this really works is, oh my goodness, there's a lot of people getting sick in town X, or a lot of cancer or whatever. Somebody goes, maybe we should look into this.
Yeah.
But is there some system by which, like, a researcher in MSU kind of goes, oh, that's a red flag, we should kind of, because there's so many chemicals out there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So remember I said we have, I don't know, roughly 100 on the drinking water standards list as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. There's something called the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule. And what the EPA does at the federal level is when, and I'm not sure how things are flagged, how contaminants are flagged for this, but there is a list of contaminants that we're thinking we're going to need to be making standards for. It's a very long process because it's health-based. We do a lot of studies way beyond my expertise area on, if you were drinking water with that contaminant over 70 years, what are the chances that you would develop cancer or other health problems from it? So what they do is they add contaminants onto this unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And then you will see in a municipal water supply report that they will throw some of those unregulated contaminants that they have been monitoring from EPA onto that report. So the municipalities will monitor for these new compounds, and then they will report back on what they're finding. And then EPA will look collectively at the states that have been monitoring for these unregulated contaminants. And then they have some kind of system that they use about whether does it make sense to develop a standard for this or not. And then they'll get kicked over to the list where we're going to have standards developed for that contaminant. So I would encourage you to take a look at a couple of the water quality reports for municipalities, and you will see some of those contaminants on that separate list. Okay, how about Athena and then Paige? Oh, Athena, you've got your mute on.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to ask you your own kind of personal view of water cleansing systems, anywhere from a very simple Brita container to the whole house. And it sounds like filters are really important, maintaining that. But with regard to looking, there's so many things out there, and I have a Brita, but that's kind of very, very basic. And I was just wondering in your thoughts on what might be a useful addition.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I don't really stay up with the filtration technology because it's so hard to keep up with. Usually what we say is that if you can find a filter that has been approved by the they used to be National Sanitation Foundation. They're kind of just like IHOP. They no longer stand for that. It's just NSF. So if you can find a filter that has been NSF approved, then you can be assured that they have put it through rigorous testing. It's just so hard to keep up with name brands and different types of filters. So make sure it's NSF approved, and then make sure that you're following the manufacturer's guidelines for filter replacement.
Great, thank you.
Paige, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had an update at all about, or if you're familiar with boron light in their Erickson plant and their the high levels of boron that they've been finding in that area.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not, but I have, like, if you had specific questions, I know who you could talk to about that.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because I have I have somebody in my family that lives nearby, and they've been asking lots of questions about it. So Borwan Light is currently supplying them with bottled water, and they've had their well tested and that sort of stuff. But I just haven't heard an update yet from Borwan Light. So
Okay, I can get you the name of someone.
Okay,
that
that'd be
I
great.
can put you in touch with. Amanda and then Leroy. Oop, Amanda, you're on mute.
Thanks. I loved your pictures of the barriers around the well and the cracked wellhead, and I would love to use those to educate further. I don't know if you could share the presentation or just those images, but I'll try and bug you about that later because that would be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Leroy?
Yeah, you mentioned sort of the protected area around wells and eliminating problematic land uses. We've talked a lot about preserving wetlands, and we've talked about impermeable surfaces and things like that. But kind of curious about the significance of protecting our swamps and wetlands, and how really important is that to protecting groundwater? Is there a direct connection, or is it more of an indirect issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my answer to that would be most of our municipal wells are fairly deep. So they're tapping into those lower aquifers. However, we know that there's a direct connection between groundwater and surface water. It's part of the water cycle. In Michigan, we have a significant amount of groundwater that discharges directly to our surface waters, our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. And that is what we refer to as base flow. So in very low flow conditions, middle of July, haven't had a rain in a really long time, we've got this nice cool water in our rivers and streams. That's groundwater, direct connection. So for our shallower wells, they are much more likely to have that direct connect to those surface water features like wetlands or streams. In my class, I have a little show and tell that I use of different types of water samples that have come through over my desk over the years. And one of them was a woman who brought in a bottle of water that was teal colored that had come out of her faucet that morning. She wasn't from the Lansing area, but she said, "What is in my water?" And it turned out she was, her home was adjacent to a putt-putt golf course where they were applying, what's the name of that stuff that you put on the pond to keep weed growth down, that teal colored stuff. And so her well was so shallow that she was pulling it right in from the water features on the golf course next door. So shallower wells would certainly be what we would be concerned about. Now, that being said, wetland protection is incredibly important. And, we spent so many years here all across the Midwest draining wetlands because we wanted to farm the land, right? We can't grow crops unless we have a way to drain the fields. So we got rid of half of our wetlands in Michigan. And then we said, oh, that probably wasn't a very good idea. So now we give cost share to farmers trying to get wetlands put back in place on the landscape. So regardless of whether we think there's a direct connect between the municipal water supply and the wetland, we really need to be emphasizing wetland protection. Bruce?
Yeah, there was a question I think Kim posted in the chat regarding bottled water companies. And I wonder if you could address.
Yeah, so that's an interesting sticky wicket, isn't it? Typically, water bottling operations, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Nestle case in Mecosta County. Bottled water is not, does not have the same oversight as a municipal water supply. So, well, I'll say that, but then I'll also say that a significant portion of the bottled water that we buy It's just water that comes from a municipality. Okay, so in that sense, there's oversight. But it is regulated more so by Department of Ag and Rural Development that is responsible for inspection of the water bottling facility itself. And then the Food and Drug Administration, which regulates bottled water sales that cross the state lines. So individual water bottling operations are not held, frankly, to the same standards as a municipal water supply system. And so, and in many cases, we're paying more than we pay for gasoline. You know, we all have our little gas buddy on the phone and we're trying to figure out where we're getting this cheapest gas, and we'll drive across town to save 20 cents a gallon. And meanwhile, we stop at a convenience store and buy, you know, a $5 bottle of water. It doesn't make any sense. So unless you are in a situation like Paige's relatives who are in an area that we know has been impacted by contamination, bottled water absolutely plays a role in disaster relief and in, you know, Flint and Benton Harbor and communities where we have compromised municipal water supply systems. Otherwise, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So please buy an Nalgene bottle and fill it up from your faucet with East Lansing Meridian water. That makes a lot more sense. Let's go to Sarah and then Sam, and then I haven't been doing a very good job with the chat, so I'll have to take a look at that. Sarah, do you have a question?
I was just going to ask Kim's other question in the chat, which is lead a concern in well water or only municipal water?
Yeah, so that depends on your household and the age of your house. So in municipal systems, obviously we're looking at the supply lines, and it's the pipes that are the issue, and the pipes that potentially have lead in it. So in older houses where we have perhaps either lead pipes or solder that was used in the distribution system in the house, then you might want to check for lead in your household. That's a good question. That's something that you should think about if you're especially in an older house. Sam? Whoop, you're on mute, Sam.
Sorry about that. So knowing that our groundwater supply is holding up pretty well for the demand on it right now, but I'm just curious if you know of any projections that are being done that would look at future needs, you know, based on, you know, potential population growth or those kinds of things that might happen.
Yeah, you know, we've been talking about that collectively. We have a group that Lauren belongs to, and I think Amanda goes to some of the meetings. It's the Groundwater Management Board, and maybe you're familiar with that. East Lansing Meridian is on that. MSU is on that. Years ago, GMB looked at the Saginaw Formation and looking, you know, trying to project down the road. And at that time, there were some concerns because of General Motors. They said, oh my gosh, we're going to be stressing this aquifer system. And then that didn't pan out. And we realized that we didn't think that was going to be a problem. But now we're starting to ask that a question again, is can we look at the aquifer? What do we think is likely to happen in terms of capacity, in terms of use in the greater Lansing region? I think that's a question that we're starting to ask, and we will be looking at more. And frankly, I don't know, for those of you who have been following the whole Eagle Township on the west side with the potential, it was Michigan State property that was given to them, and we're looking at what might happen at that piece of property and the water that might be required, depending on, you know, if a chip factory, not potato chips, but chip for electronics went in, and how much water would they likely need for that. Those kinds of, when those big high level projects come up, that's when we start asking the question, gosh, how are we doing in terms of forecasting future needs of our water? I don't think we're there yet, Sam. That's a question that's starting to pop up again.
We try and keep these to about an hour. Great questions. I hate to cut it off, but I want to respect people's time. I guess if there's one more question that people are just dying to ask, feel free. But maybe Ruth, if you're willing to share your email, if people have follow-up.
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely. So let me just put this back on. So my email is there on the screen. It's kliner@msu.edu.
Awesome. And just a reminder that we have Todd Nichols from the Water Resource Recovery Facility in East Lansing. He'll be here on May 3rd. And Sam helped line up a landscape architect, green infrastructure, also sites expert, which is like the lead for landscapes, who will be here on April 19th for a conversation. But thank you so much. Let's give Ruth a hand for such an informative conversation today.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Good to
Yeah.
see you
Great.
all. Take care.
Thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording and yeah, hope to see you again.
Thanks, Ruth.
I know.